You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. And it's morning where we are recording today, but no telling what time you might be listening to this show. This is Doug Thorpe and another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. My guest today is a gentleman who's going to help us understand the idea as leaders of having a conscious conversation. That's an interesting term, and it piqued my interest is when I got my first invite from his team to have him on, and I'm happy that we can finally do this. His name is Dr. Greg Stewart. Greg, welcome to the show.
And thank you, Doug. Honestly, the pleasure is mine, sir.
You bet. So as is a bit of a custom here, we like to always start by letting our guests give a little bit of backstory of their journey and what led them to this focal point of work that you're doing now to help others. Give us that quick summary of your journey.
All right. So I'm going to start super early, but don't worry. It only takes a couple minutes. So I like to begin when I was a kid. I went to church and became a Christian when I was a kid, but my parents were going to church, which meant I quit going to church. But I did the party hardy teen years, as a lot of us did, and then suffered the consequences from those years. And then recommitted my life to Christ and landed back at the exact same church I was at as a kid. Well, at that point, I felt called into the ministry. So spent a summer in South America, then went to a one-year Bible Institute and came back. And then the pastor of the church asked me to be the youth pastor. Well, at that point, I didn't have a bachelor's degree. I was one of those, back in the day when I had like 160 credit hours, but no degree. So they were starting the adult continuing education programs in Michigan, where I'm from, and they had the degree in organizational leadership. So I said, cool. So I took the one for 1 year and got my degree, but I was really focused on getting to seminary, even though I love the material. But my first semester of seminary, I took philosophy of counseling, and then my eyes were opened again, lots of defining moments here. And so I mapped out a dual master's degree. So I got my MDiv in 3 years. So in 2000, got ordained. But right then, another defining moment of a perfect storm where I came across the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And then for a lot of people, obviously, that book changed a lot of people's lives. And at the same time, I started teaching in all the organizational leadership courses that I took in my undergrad and fell in love with organizational leadership. And at the same time, I was underneath a leader who was not very, he great guy in so many areas, but he just really had a lot of emotional struggles. So in that sense, after I got my MA in counseling, I became a counselor, licensed counselor. So I was a pastor, adjunct professor, and counselor. Then I started working my PhD in counseling, but I did my dissertation on the relationship of emotional intelligence with job satisfaction and organizational commitment. So organizational leadership. And right after that, I had a VP of HR from the Stryker's largest division in Michigan attend my church, and he got me, and that's where I cut my teeth, organizational leadership coach, executive coaching teeth at that company. Very, very powerful company, excellent experience. So then I moved to Texas in 2012 and then worked for a assessments company where we benchmarked top performers and did Leadership 360. So I flew around the country for 3 years, meeting with senior leadership teams, doing strategy development, talking about emotional intelligence, synergy among the team, and so on. So I just had a plethora of different things that, through my history of walking through both the leaders as a pastor, as a counselor, and the like. So that's kind of like a little bit of a background on who I am.
So in all of that, you've now centered on this idea of having conscious conversations. And am I to infer that that's talking about where the employee needs to have a sit down and talk about things, or is that just leadership in general?
Well, it's actually a combination of all. So right now I'm full-time telehealth, and I do executive coaching as well. So the conscious conversation. So there is this duality because we're in organizations, but these conscious conversations happen not only within the organization, but they happen at home too. And there is no difference between who we are in one sense at home and who we are at work, in the sense that those same are occurring, like in my book on I Cubed, Unlock the Inner Strength Behind Our Negative Emotions, that It's really that exposure that we have in our negative emotions, both for us as leaders and as well the employees, that we can have a conversation about the said topic, which, most conversations go well, but a lot of times in a variety of ways, those emotions get inflated. And then that's what happens that kind of comes out and kind of blows up the conversation. So in the first couple of chapters of my book, when it comes to just talking about all the psychobabble stuff as far as emotional goals, I talk about mental models and the awareness that to create a positive conversation, we have to walk into each conversation that might be problem solving, recognizing that number one is our mental models are goofy. Frankly, a long time ago, I decided that the formulas in my brain are not on it. And then secondly, is that we have the blind areas from the Johari window model. And recognizing that immediately creates an aura of teachability, both from the follower and the leader. Then they walk into a conversation, they proactively, this is different than reactively, proactively engage each other and say, look, Doug, I know that I have blind areas and that you see things about me that I do not see. So both not me with, let's say you're my boss, but even as the leader with the employee, the same thing can be stated, that the employees can see those things about the boss that the boss may not see. So in creating a very conscious, I would say a conscious and intentional conversation to actually produce fruit and growth, that's the key, is that we have product teachability, meaning that there is about information in the back of your mind that I don't have. That's information I want, because in order for us not to just solve the immediate problem, but to really create synergy between boss, employee, between peers, everybody in our 360, that's the kind of conscious, intentional conversation we need to have.
You packed a lot in there that I think we can spend probably the rest of the time here unpacking a little bit. So I like to start with that idea. You said something about the thoughts that are in your mind are just goofy, and I think that speaks to the paradigms that we all walk around with, and most of us, particularly those in leadership, have developed these paradigms from various experiences. Could go all the way back to your childhood and your schooling, things you got programmed to believe, think and believe, and that became a framework from which you want to operate. And today's world may be indicating to you that paradigm may not be sufficient for the challenge that you're facing. And if you keep pushing against that, you're going to continue having the same poor result from it.
Exactly. So the key is that, we recognize just like foundational truth that, our mental model is, made up of, our DNA, life experiences and choices, right? And we, with the EI, create a lot of self-awareness around the formulation of our mental model, that in our mental model, we have information, but in every situation, we don't have all the information. And then secondly, the formulas by which we interpret the information, right? So we recognize that as people. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, sure, I could be wrong, or yeah, I might have some blind areas, but the key to it all is to create a process or formula or techniques in which to ensure that we kind of hold ourselves against that, to ensure that we become the most emotionally intelligent. Because in EI, there's self-awareness, and then there's others awareness, or which I actually use the phrase situational awareness. Mm-hmm. Each situation, it's like situational leadership. Situational awareness, I say, is the king or queen. The situation holds all the cards. The situation has the brick wall that the leader, the employee, whoever it is, walks into the situation, and their mental model says, here, Greg, say this, feel this, think this. And I'm like, whoa, just because my mental model, because it only has so much to go off of, tells me to do something, doesn't mean it's the right approach for the situation, because obviously we only have self-interest. So recognizing and reading the situation, that what's the right approach, what to do or what the opinion is may not change, but it's just a matter of teachability, because I may not have all the information, but then how to approach it is where EI really comes to fruition. So a little simple technique, which is my book, I cubed, I was a math major in my undergrad, so that's where the cubed comes from, is information, interpretation, intensity, right? A simple, three I's. So I liken it onto the Panama Canal, and the Panama Canal obviously is in the news a lot lately. So the Panama Canal, the principle is the first lock has to fill up before the second lock opens. Okay. So the first lock is information. Now, it would be awesome if every single human being, Doug, in this world applied this one rule that it is illegal for me. I like using the word illegal, creates a punch. It's illegal for me to have any opinion, interpretation, or any emotion, intensity until I have all the information. It's impossible for me to have an opinion about a topic unless I have as much information as I can possibly glean, right?
Yeah.
So that information has to fill up first. Once that lock opens up, now we have interpretation, and this is where emotions get set aside and we do critical thinking skills. Like I'm going to work on my next book. I just wrote I cubed and then I cubed for couples because I do a lot of marriage counseling. And then the next one, my wife and I are actually going on a cruise here in a bit, and I'm write I cubed for leaders. So the next one is the interpretation. So we have to take care of blind spots and biases, right? So the biases, a lot of us have them, like confirmation biases, of course, a big one that we hear information that confirms us. So, we want to go with it. So the second one is interpretation, which basically the key question is there any other way of looking at this? So basically I say invite even your most staunch, quote unquote enemies into the picture. You have the information, and then you obviously have a way of thinking about it, which is what your mental model is. But is there any other way of looking at it? I use negative, neutral, positive, that other people brought to the table, even though they're not in the room, you can do this by yourself. How would they interpret the information that you may not necessarily see? That's where critical thinking is, to put biases and emotions at bay to make sure that you have the most critical thinking approach. And there could be several paradoxical interpretive sentences that must coexist together, right? That are all true on the information. And then once that comes into play, then we have the intensity, which is emotion. So I frame emotion as energy, right? So what's the most effective response to the first two steps? So a technique like that, based upon it just kind of sets it at bay, and it obviously incorporates our own skills, because our own skills, mental model, there are pieces obviously that are very true and very effective, but we've got to incorporate other things. So I try to, with leaders, individuals, couples, doesn't matter who it is to set our emotions at bay and then bring in a simple technique. I have a bunch, but bring in a simple technique in order to be able to approach each situation as it comes to us.
So what I'm thinking about, first off, just to demonstrate application of that. So if the leader is trying to follow this path and do all these things, have that situational awareness, what I would see is a leader, he assembles his team and says, all right, time for a team meeting. We've got some issues we want to talk about. Issue number one, and he might put it out there. Some people in the leadership positions will immediately say, all right, here's what I think about this. And then that sets the tone for the rest of the meeting. And often it stifles any sort of input. It's a statement of whatever bias and outcome of the process this individual's already had. But what I'm hearing is, the leader that is fully present in your model would say to the team, all right, here's the issue. Now I want to get input. I want to get your data perspective, and starts going around the room and lets everybody have a voice, and, compiles that information, and perhaps even then does a team exercise to do that second step sort of analysis of things. But I think what often will happen and does happen without any checkpoint, even if the leader is willing to have or try to prepare and present that openness among the team, teammates are going to get at odds because they're not operating at that level yet. They still have, the traditional lock-in, their own bias about what their unit is doing. And if we go there, then that's going to impact my unit and that's going to impact my bonus and my comp. And, so I now need to go on defense and I need to protect my turf and all that kind of dynamic.
Right.
So that leads me to the question, not only how does a leader implement all of this individually, but how does a leader guide their team to practice the same ideas?
For sure. So great question. So a leader sets the tone, right? So a leader says, okay, this is how we're going to do this moving forward. So by the plain and simple fact of the recognition around, let's say you have now intellectual bias is not necessarily a bad thing, because if I had zero emotion based upon all my critical thinking and calculations, this is the right decision moving forward. And that's fine. You can hold to that, because based upon that, the only thing you need to do there is you need to invite in other intellectual insights based upon, because you not only have information, you have formulas. So it could be purely like a Spock approach, if you will, and then just recognize that there's more information out there that we need to glean. And secondly, that then you have the recognition that you tell the team that there is emotional bias, and that is what we have to mainly set aside, because that's you have your personal dog in the fight, and that's where most biases come in, like groupthink or confirmation bias or what have you. So the leader comes in and just states those two simple principles. So moving forward, this is what we're going to do to ensure that we accomplish the maximum of intellect and maturity and emotional intelligence in both sides. And a book, also promote another book, is The Six Thinking Hats, is a great book because it has the six thinking hats that, regardless of your personal bent, you have each hat that everybody, okay, we're all going to don on the white hat right now, all the black, all the red. That way we make sure that all of us, if you were to don on the red hat, what would be your approach, both in the intellect as well as the approach? So there's ways to set up a format and the recognition. So the leader also models and then teaches, because the leader just, doesn't just like manage. The leader leads and influences, guides, and teaches and coaches in EI as well. So coming into it saying, this is what is true for every single team ever. This is our process to make sure we maximize both the passion and emotion, which is what we want, but also the intellect. And this is how we're going to approach it, using some things like the Six Thinking Hats approach. And then that incorporates and sets at bay. And obviously, if there is emotional bias involved, it'll be obvious in a heartbeat, because it's not objective. And even though there's passion there, the passion is inflated, that emotional energy is inflated, that doesn't match the point of the argument. And hopefully that makes sense, right? So that's where emotional bias is coming in, because the person obviously can link in that you obviously have something personal invested here, that you want to go this way for personal reasons, not what's best for the team, the group, the department, the company. Your mic is off.
As you say that, I'm thinking about two ends of the spectrum that I work on. As most of my listeners know, I do some executive coaching work in the corporate realm, but I also do some business advisory and coaching work in small to mid-sized businesses. And speaking of these things, I see this play out in both domains. It really doesn't matter how big the company is.
Yeah.
The best work gets done with smaller teams. It's just a fact and reality that you can observe at all levels. And inevitably, what does happen, people tend to operate based on precedent, what got done before that might have been successful at that time. And I will isolate the smaller business. So, typical entrepreneurial enterprise is the owner founder kind of sets the tone, sets the pace, drives and designs everything. As they build teams around them, they direct and somewhat dictate what ought to be done to get the right outcome that matches their vision of what they wanted to do. And 10, 20, sometimes 30 years goes by and the business is rocking along, cranking along. I had two businesses just recently that I visited and did leadership workshops with. The team had been with the company on average more than 10 years, so they were well established. But a new owner had come in and bought the companies. The owner founder was ready to retire and move on. So new, somewhat younger owners have moved in. And as we talk about what is going on and what should be going on, you quickly realize, number one, there's some pin-up opportunity. Even those people that have been there a long time have ideas. They're boots on the ground out in the market. They see what customers are asking for, and they bring it back to the founder, and he says, "Nah, we're not going to do it that way. We've been doing it this way all along. I don't really want to change anything." So they go, "Okay, boss, that's what we'll do." Now a new guy comes in and says, "Do we need to do anything different in the new market?" And all the hands go up. Yes, we
Right,
do.
right.
Here's some things and ideas we need to do. So it's that incredible bias that pre-exists, but I even see that dynamic in bigger corporations as well. You've got people that have been on a career path for quite some time. They join a leadership team, and a new market condition emerges, and the big boss wants to have a meeting and say, "How are we going to tackle this?" And you get a tremendous amount of input that says, "Well, this is the way we've always solved this kind of problem." And that simply in today's modern world does not necessarily work anymore. There has to be more innovation and more creativity of ideas to solve the new issues that are emerging.
Right, exactly. And that's where, so you have a couple of things. One is that, I use the number line -10 to +10. And obviously -10 to 0 is where problems are being caused, whether it be again individual, couples, companies, whatever. And then you have 0 to +10. So, like, to use Peter Drucker's terminology, -10 to 0 is efficiency, 0 to +10 is effectiveness. So efficiency is doing things right. So the leader, it's a smooth running machine, and based upon the market, it's successful because you have SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Well, the opportunities, there's enough there with low enough threats that keeping things the way they are still is producing fruit, and no problems are being caused. So it's kind of like, why change? And everybody's adverse to change because, whether it be, security or significance, people feel significant when there's no problems, and they feel secure when there's no problems. But there's other people that come along and say, "Hey, we could be even more significant." So we're on the positive side of the number line, but we're operating at a +3. Man, here's some ideas that we could do things, the right things, and even be more effective. But there's adverse to that, like change. So the key is that eventually where it happens with core organizations, I'm sure you've seen this, is that they're operating at, let's say, +1, 2, 3, 4. But when those opportunities and threats start flipping based upon the market, based upon a variety of other variables that they don't have control over, then they're so far behind because it takes time to catch up the system. That's why companies, most companies only have a lifespan of the age of a human being. Well, hence the entrepreneur, right? Because eventually the threats outweigh the opportunities, but right now it's too little too late. So it's always bringing in that objective point of view. And if you bring it in early enough, the threat of change decreases greatly because we're just processing and then implementing small changes. But you have, whether it be the team or the organization, and that's the key thing is when proactive teachability is you're always proactively going after where others in the market, in your industry, what have you, would completely disagree with you. I actually use this technique with senior leadership teams. And I asked, we would go through this whole strategy thing. And I'd say, okay, last step, right? So we're all confident. Last step is, imagine the Warren Buffett of your industry walks in to this meeting right now, looks at everything in summary, and he adamantly, defiantly, belligerently disagrees with you. Where is he right? right? And it jolts us out of all of our mental models because there's also the bias, not only like confirmation bias, but there's bias of group think, as we all know, right? So to pull us out of that group think, they have to do the work because they are blind somewhere. They are wrong somewhere. They haven't incorporated some piece of information. And it could be like this little light down the road of the market, let's say, that's small, but it's coming. And it's that kind of thing, right? So how do we create techniques to ensure against those biases? Because they're just emotional biases, whether it be like a personal dog in the fight or just adverse to change. There are biases. So what techniques do we use to measure us or to make sure that we don't go down those biases road? Because eventually it's going to bite us and bite us hard.
Yeah. To me, what I've experienced is when you start thinking about a principle like this, and it all makes great sense to me. I do want to be quick to say that. At the same time, what I do see, it almost becomes a three-dimensional challenge because you layer over the mix of personality types that are around the table on your team, whether it's a direct leadership team or just a team of employees. You're trying to implement and do these things, but you've got people on a wide spectrum of where they land and essentially how they bring their own biases and paradigms and experiences to the table. You've got those that are quick adopters, say, all right, boss, I get it. I love it. Let's go. Let's go. I'm ready. Jump, jump, jump.
Yeah.
But then you got those that are passive aggressive participants. At the meeting, they nod their head. Oh yeah, this makes sense. And then they go to the water cooler and go, "Can you believe what that guy said?
Right, exactly.
There's no way I want to do this." And then you got the others way on the other end that are just like, Chicken Little, sky is falling. Oh my gosh, another change. How are we going to endure this?
Right. And so, like with the sixth thing he has, and this, like the disc. So, you always have to incorporate personality assessment because that's the DNA piece. We walk into this world with formulas that basically, let's say, extrovert, introvert, task oriented. So that is every one of us. As a matter of fact, when I don't see how we can do leadership coaching without personality assessment, because that's honestly where when it comes to leadership, it's again not your intellectual IQ as far as business strategy and skills. It has to do with your how, and which is leadership, right? Leadership management. So that I would also tell the team, I said, okay, team, in the next quarter, like using the disc or the DISC, or you've got the colors red, yellow, green, blue. That's personality. So in the next quarter, what does your team, your department, your company need from you? What approach? So is it the D, the red, where it's like, look, enough talking, we've got to execute now, right? Or is it yellow I, where it's like, we are in a rut. We've been doing the same thing. We've got to brainstorm and we got to think outside the box. Or is it green, where somebody says, you know what, guys, we're doing kind of the idea of the month club. Can we just, stick to an idea for 6 months because we need to be steady, do a long, steady drive to see the strengths and weaknesses. And then you have the blue, the C, the conscientious, which is, look, all of you guys are giving your opinions, bless your hearts, right? We use that in Texas, bless your heart, right? But it's data rules the world. What are the facts? What does the data say? So what is the most important thing? Because all are important, right? It's situationally based. So in some situations, we just need to execute, brainstorm, long, steady drive, or look at the data. And then that's bias, right? So because of I feel comfortable executing, right? So, but it may not be the most emotionally intelligent thing to do based upon our situation. And that's where something like the six thinking hats approach, it's based in but everybody, like even the reds put on the yellow hat, the green hat, and the blue hat, right? And it's also brilliant for, improving our emotional intelligence. So I say personality ran through the machine of EI equals your leadership effectiveness, right? Because you got to step outside of yourselves. Sometimes the situation, man, Greg matches the situation. But Doug, I don't know about you, brother, but I've been told many times in my life, hey, Greg, can you just not be you right now? Right? Right? I haven't been told that in a while, but that's exactly what it's saying. It's your approach, the natural Greg approach, is not a good fit for the situation. The classic I always use, it's really old now, but Lee Iacocca Chrysler. He was the right leader for the time. Well, his approach was exactly the fit for what the situation where Chrysler was at the time. That's why it worked. And of course, there are countless examples that we don't hear about because there's so many of them. The disasters where the leader came in and it wasn't a right fit. The leader just brought himself or herself into it and then stuck with their mental model, and then it was a disaster. Then obviously they each blame each other. But both are wrong because it's a matter of what was needed for the situation. And that's, again, what tools and techniques are you going to do to take away personal bias, group bias, company culture bias, right? Because that's what you're talking about earlier, as far as the company culture could be from the entrepreneur, CEO, owner, or it could be from the team. So that's what we have to do. In my book, I'm going to talk about that. The intellect and the biases, right? We've got to be aware of both intellectual and emotional biases, because that's what's going to mess us up every time. And what are the techniques? And that's actually having that fruitful, conscientious conversation among the team, right? So there is an objective way to approach this, okay? And we've got to just, what techniques can, whether it be Warren Buffett, Six Thinking Hacks, EI, situational awareness, SWOT analysis, in order to, or frankly, all of it, in order to make sure that we've, proverbially covered all the bases. And if we have that, then it should be, then you can actually tap into, as the organic creativity of everyone. Because you do need those, there's nothing new under the sun kind of approach, which is true. Right? There's nothing new under the sun, which, some companies found out, like the whole Bud Light thing with, the transgender. There's nothing's new here. Like it's going to be college guys that are going to buy this beer. So you got to be careful not to just, create something that, oh my gosh, they never thought of this before. There is enough ingenuity and creativity among, like you said, a small team. That's a small team does achieve both goals. You have enough people that creates the beautiful magic of creativity and synergy. But, that's large enough to have that many people to create that, but it's small enough that you don't get bogged down in the masses, right? So I think you're right and brilliant in that sense. So there's the right number of team members to ensure both. There's always more than one goal, always more than one goal. And that's goal. You want to have enough where it creates, so we don't get into the group thing and get rutted, but we don't want to be have so many people that we get lost in the mire just to have everybody have a voice.
Right. It's interesting to me that, for everything we're saying here today, my one takeaway for leaders is it all starts with a elevated sense of awareness.
Yep.
Looking in the mirror and ask yourself the question, what beliefs and limiting thoughts might I be applying to the world around me right now, and what do I need to be willing to change? If I've been told 100 times that the way I start a meeting is not effective, well, I probably ought to consider a new approach. I probably ought to hear that. I ought to find a mentor, find a coach, find somebody that can help me discover a new idea and a better way to do it. And that is such a critical, kind of coming out of the gate sort of moment of having that awareness to be willing to ask yourself that question.
Yeah. So self-awareness on just like, again, your wiring and all that, what your mental model brings to the table, and then self-awareness around your current state of emotions, because that changes. Then that number 2 is situational awareness, because again, what you bring to the table might at this point, like in this season of our company, oh my gosh, there might be a perfect blend of now, Greg, oh, we need you because there's a perfect match. But then there's self-management when there's a gap between what the situation needs and what you provide. So then it's like what you just said. I love that, because the leader says, okay, the way you start a meeting, and you're like, okay, all right, don't begin this way. Don't begin this way. Or we often say to ourselves, okay, Greg, don't get angry, or don't do this. And your mental model goes, oh, okay, cool, bro. What do you want me to do? Our mental model is energy. So that's where the coaching comes in, obviously to promote our our own companies here, but coaching comes in because our mental models need a new formula. And when you have a coach that has been working with hundreds of individuals, they can pull in other formulas to add to your mental model, so you can train your mental model saying, hey, it's not just a matter of not this, but here's what you do. And because neuroplasticity, our brains are like plastic and mold themselves, you can train yourselves in the most effective, because it always is the most effective. But here's what we all need to be self-aware on. Of course, there's no silver bullet, right? There's no, of course, the one approach. That's why situational leadership, when it comes to all these theories of leadership, well, what's the best theory of leadership? Well, gee, Wally, all of them. There's different main points to each brand of leadership theory that you've got to pull in and synergize together, right? So it's all of it. So you need to be equipped in the overall, all the theories, because the situation you need to, but all the different situations, what's the right, not only just what the situation needs, but what skills, techniques, abilities do I have to maximize the situation versus this one? That's where I think the brilliance, the IQ and the EQ come in situational awareness. But then you need some way to be equipped. Okay, so you see this is the type of leader needed for the situation. Okay, but do you have the skills to be that leader in that type of situation?
Yeah. The analogy I use often in the early sessions with my coaching clients, I use the golf analogy. I tell them your leadership skill set is kind of like the game of golf. There's 14 clubs you put in the bag according to golf regulation, and you can pick what those clubs are. And but when you do create a collection of clubs, what you've got is a couple. Some of the clubs are intended to hit the ball long and far, and others create high loft where the ball's going way up in the air and coming down shorter distances, but with a lot of control. And the trick to that, it's not just having the 14 clubs. You can talk about leadership attributes like communication, integrity, building trust, accountability, go on and on and on. There's 1,000 words you can use. But the pro golfers get really good at hitting one club different ways. And they hit every club different ways depending on the situation that they're facing. Here we are, back to situation. And that's the argument I make to try to get people to understand the concept of, yes, you need to learn certain skills and build certain attributes as a leader. But if you want to be a great leader, you need to apply those differently in all of the different situations you're going to encounter, because one size does not fit all.
Right. That's brilliant. And not only that, but among all the pro golfers, do they only own 14 clubs? Of course not. Right. Right? They own, because then it's based upon the course they're going to play. So this course, you have to hit the long ball off the tee. Other courses, second shot means everything, and so on. So then this course is a chipping course. So they not only, and I love the clubs you hit it differently for sure, but then you have based upon the course itself. And the course is what? It's the season that you're in. I mean, there's a bunch of different things you can use the analogy, but that's brilliant as far as the analogy that goes in. But then the leader's like, okay, cool. Love the analogy. Number one, what are the clubs? Number two is, how do I hit the club of visioneering differently, right? Number three is based upon how do I know the course? What are the various courses or situations I'm going to? So it's not, you have the whole course, you have the whole and all that sort of thing. So that's what our job is to take that analogy and then put it down based upon their situation. This is what you do, at least. But again, it's almost like a scientific art. It's again, both things. It's very, very organic in a lot of ways, where you have to use real-time situational awareness, but also it's the science of, there's nothing new under the sun, right? It's still going to come down to these core principles.
Right. Well, and, not to beat the analogy to death, but it still comes down to situational awareness. Like you said, if the for the pro golfer, if the tour I'm on is taking me to Pebble Beach, well, that's a certain kind of course. And you're right. Do I load my bag with different clubs depending on what I anticipate? And but it's that awareness and willingness to change, because I could try to make the pro tour and say all I'm going to have in my bag is my 7-iron and my putter, and that I'm going to get really good at hitting 7-irons and
Exactly.
putting, but you're not going to compete. You just won't. And
Yeah.
there's too much with the way the courses are built. The challenges that are out there now, they're longer than they ever were. So for those of
Yeah.
you that don't know golf very well, a 7-iron is a mid-range club. It only hits a certain distance, and you're never going to get a 300-yard shot out of a 7-iron. And it's just physically, dynamically impossible to do so. But, and the pros know that.
Yeah. And one more on the golf analogy. Then you have the not just the course, but then you have the ebb and flow of the market, which is like the invitationals or outings or whatever you want to call them at the beginning of the season. Like the Waste Management one has a very different momentous feel than the Masters. So as far as the hardest courses on earth, does the Masters the hardest course? No, but it doesn't matter. The Masters is the Masters. And so even though you use your clubs according to the course, there's also an emotional intelligence self-management game to this, that based upon this season, this time, it's like, it's the times that, man, we have to hit a home run here. This is crucial. And that's like the Masters, because the Masters kicks off the majors kind of thing. So there's not just like, it's not about the course itself. It's about the ebb and flow of the season, the mood, the atmosphere.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, we're about up on time for this episode. Thank you so much for sitting in. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more.
And honestly, Doug, great conversation. Again, my pleasure. So simply drgregstewart.com, just DRGREGSTEWART, all one word, drgregstewart.com.
That's awesome. And as always, folks, we will have that link in the show notes, so feel free to hop down and grab that information and get with Greg if you want to know more or get access to his books. I do like to remind you, if you're listening to this on your favorite streaming service, we do have a video version over on YouTube, channel by the same name. Hop over there, take a look at the archives and leave us some comments. Let us know if you've got any thoughts or ideas that you'd like to hear from us. And I think that's about it from a housekeeping standpoint. My links for accessing me and my team will also be in the show notes. You can go there. But for now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.